to this question, I'm just gonna go there. The answer is yes. We are building products that are ruining the world, but we don't have to. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because I do believe technology is capable of making the world a better place. I think we just have to choose that. So before I get started, I want to ask everyone to not multitask. That's what I would do if we were in person. So I'm going to ask it on Zoom. If you want to connect with anyone, you could obviously use chat. And I would love to hear and connect with any of you afterwards. So I want to look at a forest for a minute or two here. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a lot of Zoom fatigue. And if I could, this is where I might be to get over that Zoom fatigue, which is in a really beautiful forest. And besides all of the obvious metaphors with forests, I find them really grounding and a really optimistic place to be. So I want you guys to take a look at this beautiful forest I've found and breathe for a couple of seconds, just a couple of deep breaths to sort of shake off the day. I appreciate so much you guys joining me here. So for a couple seconds, we're just going to look at this tree. Now, if we were in a real forest, this is about when you would probably try to get your phone out. So resist that urge, and keep looking at the forest and breathing. But I do want you to think about a digital product that you use. So this could be a product you love. This could be a product that you count on. This could even be a product you take for granted because it's so consistent. And I want you to think about that product and why it was made. Because there was a team of people who made that product and they probably looked a lot like me or you. What did they want for that product? What did they hope for its users, for you? So every once in a while when we're going through this, we're going to come back to a forest. And every time we do, I want you to stop for a second and just breathe. And again, let go of mute buttons and news feeds and probably some homeschooling and just think about the product. So let's talk a little bit about the world we live in. This is my world. So this is Substantial's office, headquartered in Seattle. And like most places right now, it's empty. And I don't know if a cold rush of air swoops through an open office plan and no one's there to feel it, if it really happened. And I don't know if we'll ever know. Right now, Substantial is a fully remote and distributed company. So I've got about 45 strategists and product managers and designers and developers and ops people all working from home. And for 13 years, we've been creating digital innovation and products for startups and foundations and enterprises. And we've created products with really large companies and really small ones. Occasionally, we even build products for ourselves. And we've always been partially distributed. So we're really lucky right now that we're able to make the transition to work from home pretty smoothly. I've been in digital products for, as James said, about 20 years. And I've seen my fair share of questionable intentions and objectives and success metrics and decisions. And I've been a CEO for about 2 years, but I've been an avid technology consumer for decades. And I'm as conflicted as the next person about why and how I interact with technology and what's at stake and what's coming. So as a technologist and a leader, I have a mission to have as many conversations as I can about the agency and responsibility we have to create products with intention. And so today I'm going to spend a few minutes laying out the current environment products are made in. We'll talk about why what we create is so important. I'm going to share a case study with you about a product. And then most importantly, we're going to talk about how we can approach our work with integrity and an ethical compass. So the first thing I want to say is that technology is not a tool. Maybe it was at one point. Word processing is a tool. Word processing served through a platform that also provides your email and access to all the knowledge, news, and resources and entertainment in the world, while selling your data to advertisers, is not a tool. It's an access point that is increasingly narrow and monopolized. That's not exactly the equivalent of a hammer. Hammers don't learn from us and then monetize how we strike the nail. 90% of search queries worldwide go through one search engine. And by the way, I use their platform to create these slides. Our access to fundamental information and services is increasingly through technology and often through products from just 5 major companies. We can no longer credibly opt out of technology. For most people, that is an option beyond their awareness or activation. It's like living without electricity or transportation. Like, even television sets, when they came out, served up more entertainment than anyone ever contemplated, but their ability to learn from us was limited to a Nielsen box you had to explicitly consent to and look at every time you watched TV. So let's talk about consent. The amount of time it would take for a user to read all of the privacy policies and terms and conditions, if it was their full-time job, is a full-time job, 8 hours per day and 40 hours a week. It would take 76 working days to complete the task. And that's just reading them. Comprehending them is a completely different story. We are asking for explicit consent about implicit concepts. Terms and conditions and privacy policies are about compliance, not about ethics. The Center for Humane Technology has put together something called the Ledger of Harms, and I really recommend you go to their site and take a look at it. What they've basically done is conducted reviews of peer-reviewed academic studies to create a holistic view of the negative impacts that mobile technology and social media has on society. Things like our attention, loss of ability to focus without distraction, our mental health, loneliness, depression, stress, loss of sleep, even increased risk of suicide, less empathy, more confusion and misinterpretation in our relationships, propaganda, lies, and an unreliable and noisy place to talk. Our children are facing new challenges in how they learn and how they socialize. And lastly, the golden rule. This is a quote from a former VP at a major technology company. I can control my decision, which is that I don't use that crap. I can control my kids' decisions, which is that they're not allowed to use that crap. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. What does it say when the leaders of technology companies do not let their children use their products? This feels like a good time to go back to the forest. Take the forest in, because I know that's a lot, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed with the negative aspects of technology. Take a few breaths. What is it about a forest that succeeds? There's no clear example of an ecosystem. Everything is interrelated. The trees don't exist separately from the ground or the moss. They feed off of each other. So think about your favorite product again and the team that created it. How do you think they worked? What was the most important thing to them? Should we care about the kind of companies that create our technology? Why does all of this matter? Well, as it turns out, we do care. There is a decline in trust for technology. Even though trust still remains relatively high, it's on a steady decline. In 2015, 71% of Americans thought tech companies had a positive impact on the US. That number, this was from 2019, is now 50%. Things that people are increasingly worried about are data security, use of digital media for nefarious intent, particularly by foreign countries, workplace automation and loss of jobs, the new gig workforce and economy, and a stark lack of diversity in technology companies especially in leadership and policymaking positions. My top concern is an industry culture that prioritizes speed and deprioritizes the lives of users in general, but racial minorities in particular. So how might a rising unease with technology play out? Right as technology is on the cusp of breakthroughs on some of the world's biggest challenges, trust is declining. So imagine we're in the middle of an unprecedented global event, like a pandemic. Half of Americans won't trust exposure notification apps. Contact tracing is a huge part of successful responses to pandemics like the one we're experiencing right now. But wide adoption of these apps is necessary for them to be effective, usually 60% or above. And as it turns out, respondents recently surveyed trust public health agencies more than tech firms with their data. And there's valid concerns to be had because this is a form of surveillance. But medical surveillance has proven to be particularly effective in situations like the one we're in. I do think Apple and Google are making as many considerations about privacy as they can by decentralizing the system, but it's going to be hard to overcome the trust deficit. Of course, all of this also hinges on widespread testing, which is another challenge. But there are other global problems that will arise, both related and unrelated to COVID-19, and people's declining trust are going to make it hard to face those challenges with digital products. Imagine trying to get people to vote by application after what happened in the Iowa caucuses. If you need more of a business case of why trust in technology is important, know that your product is your brand. Users are taking into consideration far more than they did even 5 years ago. 87% trust their brand based on their experience as a product user. 56% trust your brand based on the experience as a customer, and almost 40% attribute trusting a brand to its impact on society. So we're going to think about that a little bit while we revisit the forest. Take a deep breath. And then we're going to think about your product again, and the team that created that product. How do you think they generated ideas and made decisions? Maybe there was a whiteboard and some stickies, or maybe there was a funk spec and some governance meetings. Do you think there was a woman on the team? Maybe just the one, or a person of color, or someone with disabilities, someone who didn't go to college or came from an economically challenged background. I'd like to tell you a story about a product. So we're going to leave the forest, but don't worry, we'll come back to it. We're going to talk a little bit about a company I've named Acme Health Tech. It's not the real name, but we're going to go with that for now. They've made a name for themselves by tapping into the enormous demand for digital health information, particularly health records. Their free platform allows physicians to document patient visits, order prescriptions and lab tests, and easily access their records online. Now, Acme experimented with other revenue models, but those models were going to take years to develop. And in the meantime, pharma advertising is a huge pool of money and a pretty straightforward sales environment. In 2016, drug makers spent $20 billion advertising to physicians and other prescribers. But once you choose the ad-driven path, commercial gravity tugs in the direction of selling more ad inventory and creating more effective advertising tools. By this point, Acme was backed by some very high-profile venture firms. Their revenue is estimated to reach 181 million. The platform is being used in 30,000 practices. Now, Acme was hiring an investment firm to explore an IPO, valuing the company at 1.5 billion. So they had an idea. what if they turned all that data they got from their platform into insightful information for their advertisers, especially pharmaceutical companies that really before never had access to granular weekly data on their drugs? So what they used was something called clinical decision support. And they'd used this before. So clinical decision support is any tool that provides members of a care team with information that's targeted to a specific person. And they'd used it with vaccinations, for instance, with another pharmaceutical company. They worked with them to try to boost pneumonia vaccinations in the elderly. Now, pneumonia is pretty serious, and there are over 600,000 hospitalizations annually, and at least a third of those are people who've not been vaccinated. That experiment worked really well. So they thought, why don't we apply it to other uses? Partnering with another pharmaceutical company, they started a research study. What kind of CDS would work with patients suffering from chronic pain? The idea was to get the opioid makers' pain drugs to certain kinds of patients, ones who weren't taking opioids, or those being prescribed the company's less profitable products. It also aimed to secure longer prescriptions. So you can see here from the research study that overuse of medication in paid treatment was a national issue, they acknowledged. In the end, the study found that reminders have a sustained influence on the rate of opioid prescribing. This is what the product was going to look like. A pop-up asks for a patient's level of pain, and a drop-down menu then lists treatments ranging from referrals to a prescription for an opioid painkiller. The computer-generated suggestions looked like unbiased medical information, but Acme allowed the pharma company to participate in designing the alerts, including selecting guidelines used to develop them, setting the criteria that would determine when a healthcare provider received an alert, and in some cases, even drafting the language used in the alert. Employees estimated internally that the drug company could add almost 3,000 patients and bolster opioid sales by as much as 11.3 million through this partnership. The pharma company paid Acme almost $1 million for it. And Acme reported to the drug company that the project was working as intended, shifting prescriptions to the company's extended release opioids. From 2016 to 2019, the alert went off 230 million times. It's difficult to imagine the internal decision cycle that approved this work without triggering ethical or legal alarm bells. And a company of this size, perhaps a $1 million deal might not have been discussed at the board level, but 14 of them most certainly would have been. But beyond the board, think about the leaders, the managers, the analysts, the researchers, the consultants, the designers, the developers who would have worked on this. Imagine all the meetings, and how many of those meetings were the objectives, intent, and success metrics clearly laid out. It's a good time for a visit to the forest. So let's think about your product again, the one you love. Presumably it's a positive part of your life, however small. What is the ecosystem your product lives in? What and who are the other players in that system? For every Acme Health Tech, there's a technology company putting out products that are positive additions to our lives. So how can we make more of those? Design-led firms consciously put the customer first. But who is the customer? It's worth mentioning that the employees of Acme Health Tech seem just like you and me. I don't get the sense they chose worsening opioid addiction as their career paths. From what I can tell, their design team seemed somewhat diverse and close-knit and focused on quality design practices. Their design principles, which were published right on their website during this time, were 3 words: simple, focused, trusted. Some of their design team's blog posts during this time were guidelines for designing interfaces, including as simple as possible, but no simpler. Make it intuitive and effortless. Respect and be honest with the user. Design is not a field immune from doing harm. And placing the burden of ethical choices on one department or role or on a process ignores the realities of the decisions, big and small, that happen outside of those meetings and that process. We shouldn't expect products to be inherently ethically designed just because we put them through a process. Design is a skill and an approach, and it can be employed for any purpose. Remember, most designers and design teams still report into the business. And if you're thinking regulatory process and legal requirements are going to solve ethical friction, know that compliance and ethics are not the same thing. Compliance is a minimum bar for social responsibility. In our work culture, compliance is mostly about risk mitigation. While that's necessary as a constraint, it's not a driver of creativity and responsibility. Ethics is how you change the world. It's about how you contribute and influence and lead, and acting ethically takes courage. Ethical individuals often find themselves as a party of one. This is why ethical mishaps are thornier and frankly more damaging. They can happen in such tiny steps that we don't even know we're moving until the line we crossed is miles behind us. So what I'm proposing does not replace design thinking or an ethics and compliance department. I'm proposing a set of questions that we are ready to answer even when they're hard. Questions we ask ourselves and our leadership and our teams at every level. And when we get the answers to those questions, we commit to the hard work it takes to make better choices. Some of these ideas are big and structural, and you may think you don't have that kind of power, but just asking the questions and everyone acknowledging the answer, even if it isn't what you want to hear, can make progress. Remember, everything takes time. Number 1, if you are a leader and you are not starting with why for every decision, you are doing a disservice to your team and their users. If the leaders in the company don't set a clear example of what's important, people will make their own assumptions. And maybe you think you aren't a leader, but if you're here, you can lead. What does successful engagement mean for your product? And how are you serving your users? Are you engaging in open dialogue and critical thinking? How do you define success? And does it factor in humanity, community, and society? Do you show a willingness to listen to criticism? A willingness to admit and take responsibility for ethical mistakes? Remember, leaders, whether they're team leaders or company leaders, are a model for the behavior you want to see in your team. Do you have a willingness to ask for forgiveness or take corrective action? Could you disclose all of your product's intentions openly to your team, your customers, and your users? If the answer to that gives you pause, you need to think long and hard about why that is. Step 2, change the OS. I'm not talking about the OS on your device. I'm talking about the environment, the operating system your products are being built in. Are directives and mandates coming from above without discussion or involvement at every level? Is enough time spent centering on those to ensure good decision-making? Who has an obligation to dissent? What is the message being sent by your incentive structure? Is a large percentage of compensation in equity? Are people bonused for hitting only revenue or profits? The results of that could be a bias towards shortcuts and speed and status quo and poorly thought out implications. What kind of accountability is framed in your org structure? Is it an extremely competitive atmosphere? Is there huge growth and high turnover, constant reorgs and leadership changes? We may be telling ourselves that the meritocracy will serve us, but is proven not particularly adept at ethical behavior. Teams that work in silos have a much harder time connecting to the intention of their work. If they have competing priorities or competing for resources, a very clear response to that would be to value only the objectives of one team without factoring in the larger picture. Number 3, reduce blind spots. Diversity in and of itself will not guarantee ethical products, but it is very hard to create ethically without diversity. Our homogeneous teams give us confidence in our ideas and apathy towards our blind spots. Think about the cultural norms that may be inhibiting more diversity. I can tell you I'm a female CEO with a diverse executive team, and my company still struggles with inclusivity and diversity. Besides representation, how are your meetings run? What does collaboration really look like? Who are the dominant speakers and which points of view are championed? Are you really encouraging divergent points of view? Debate and discussion foster ethical learning. And almost all ethical learning happens when people discuss and debate their values. If goals are conflicting, we can't choose between them without ethical decision-making. For me, for instance, I came from a very low income background, and that affects my ethical outlook on a deep level. I bring that part of me to every product team I've led. But I haven't always felt the safety to talk about it. It's not a coincidence that many of the largest tech companies have had high rates of harassment and troubling behavior, and many of those same companies have created ethically questionable strategies and products. Low diversity of employees limits psychological safety for anyone not in the majority, which means any employees you do have that may have an alternative point of view likely feel like they can't express them. And if we don't articulate our values, then no one can respond to us, and there's no ethical learning. So this moral muteness that many managers, employees feel prevents ethical learning. 4 is to think in systems. Products are not isolated. They're a part of an ecosystem. So in the Acme Health Tech example, that would include the users, which were doctors, and other actors like patients and insurance companies, regulatory agencies, and existing infrastructure and protocols. Do you fully understand the system your product is in? Assume it's complex and map it out. What is the key to that system? The entity whose existence all other actors depend. In the case of Acme Health Tech's product, the key was prescribers. System changes take place gradually and are interconnected. Expectations of speed, scale, and adoption cause imbalances and unexpected consequences. So does your product improve the system, change the system, or eliminate parts of the system? The Acme product changed the way prescribers made decisions and improved speed to decisions. But it made the quality of the doctor's decisions worse, and it deprived the patients of an opportunity for different kinds of care and tipped the scales even further in addiction to painkillers. What if the key to the Acme product system had actually been the patients? Last is to create with foresight. Once you understand the system, you can start to map out how it might evolve. This isn't an empty exercise. This is part of building a product in a landscape that changes rapidly. What are the trends affecting the system locally and globally? Politics, demographics, emerging technology. What will the system look like in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years? This isn't a roadmap of features of your product. This is about the system it lives in. What other actors are introduced? What actors fall away? Does the key change? Will your product fit, and how will it succeed? And lastly, I would be remiss to not mention how many good ideas and good products are deeply affected because they cannot generate revenue fast enough. This is really important. When you think about what success looks like, know that every milestone can have a profound effect on the quality of innovation. And this is true for large businesses and small, investors or not. If speed really is the most important metric for your product, what are you sacrificing for it? Unethical business practice involves the tacit, if not explicit, cooperation of others. It reflects the values, attitudes, beliefs, language, and behavioral patterns that define an organization's operating culture. The culture of your company and organization and teams will determine their output. It doesn't mean good products haven't been built in bad environments, but there was a cost to the product builders or to the users, but someone paid. So I want to end in the forest because I love the forest. I want us to breathe again and remember our product. Think about all the other products we use on a daily basis that bring something to our lives in a positive way. And then I want us to think about how empowered we actually are to make a difference. If we can commit to thinking about our intentions and our responsibility differently. With strategic foresight and a willingness to listen, learn, and act, we can create products that contribute positively to our world. If it helps, you can think of this framework as a mindset that gently lays across your organization like a moss blanket in forest. It's providing nutrients and warmth and moisture. Or maybe you can think of it as an ethical compass guiding you through the trees. Or maybe you're really tired of forests, which is okay because we're done. Thank you very much for being here and listening.
Thank you, Carey. Yeah, I was on mute, and we do have the Q&A in this part of our webinar. So if you've got some questions, just go ahead and either use the Q&A message, and then I'll read those out, and then we can get Carey's perspective on any questions that folks might be curious about. Let me know, Andy, if you see any come in.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye out for them. As we're waiting for questions, I'll just say that someone's got competition for Carey's #1 fan. I really enjoyed that. It was a great presentation. So thank you. And I see we got at least some questions coming in. So I'll let James take over for the Q&A.
Yeah, that would be great. What are some products that inspired you that you consider good?
Well, I use products all the time. And so there's lots of products that are good that don't necessarily inspire me, but are just really good at what they do. Trello is, I'm a super Trello user. So I can't express enough good things about Trello. It's simple and it does what it's supposed to do. And I really appreciate that about it. Another product we're using quite a bit now that we've gone more remote and distributed is Miro. Miro is a online collaboration tool. I highly recommend it. It's almost like having distributed whiteboards, and it's really elegantly done. It's really helpful in the way it can help you shape ideas collaboratively, even in a virtual environment. So that's two products I think are really good that I wish I had built. I didn't, although we have done a Trello plugin. I'm a little for that, but I didn't build Trello. But that's two that I think are doing, you know, really, really good job at what they're supposed to do without trade-offs.
Great. So we did have another question. Carey, you said you've been in the industry for 20 years or so. Have you noticed a change in the ethical decision-making process over the years?
I mean, I've noticed some consistency, which is that revenue is very often the driving force, right? Businesses want to succeed. I totally understand that, right? So the idea that you make decisions and trade-offs in service of revenue and profitability is not new. That's been going on for a really, really long time. But what I have noticed over the last 10 years in particular is the bias towards speed. And that's why I called that out specifically as something that really concerns me. So we, as consultants, help products a lot, particularly get to market. And I completely understand, particularly for startups, how important speed to market is. But the trade-offs that I see to get to market make me uncomfortable a lot of the time. And I think that it's a combination of both people trying to use the funding that they have and the resources they have to make the most impact, and also this sense that everything is on a time clock, and any moment you're not out there, you're missing something. I would argue that I think we're starting to see a backlash on it a little bit. I think it's going to take longer for us to really feel it, although what we're going through as a world right now might actually make that happen a little sooner. But, you know, second guessing and taking investment away from really thinking about your product's implications and the ethical questions around it and the user experience and how you treat your users and how you can monetize that in a way that doesn't abuse your users takes time. And if people don't have that time, they don't have the runway, they're going to struggle.
Right. Okay, we have a question that came in from Katie. And it was, I lead a digital products team at a nonprofit, and I'm so fortunate because I'm not incentivized by monetizing on our digital users' backs. But that's not most digital organizations' reality. How do you monetize ethically is the first question. And then how do you get out from under an unethical selling of data, shortcutting in manufacturing, overworking in teams? I generally can't figure out how anyone makes money digital in an ethical way. So I think, yeah, so that's a great question. I think we're seeing that a lot in the environment today. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd say that an exchange of something valuable for money is not a bad thing. So if you are bringing value to your user and there's a straightforward exchange of something valuable for money, that is an ethical transaction. What's different about digital products is the scale that most product companies want to work at, right? So the reason why we don't pay for many of the apps and products we use is that they know that adoption and engagement will go sky high if it's free. And so they get everyone in the large funnel of free users, and then they have to monetize through the back door, right? This is why advertising becomes such a common way to monetize a digital product. You make it free, so you get the eyeballs, and then you sell the eyeballs. The idea that we might pay for something like Gmail seems crazy at this point, right? It's free. It's always been free, but the truth is, it's not free.
Right.
And I think that's that cognitive dissonance that product people are starting to get, and certainly being talked about a lot more in the circles that I'm in and in talks like this, but our average user actually is not understanding that trade-off. And that's something we need to understand as well, that product people are far more sophisticated about these things than non-product people, to sort of group the world into two different. So in the case of the Acme Healthcare case study, and by the way, if it was not abundantly obvious, that is a very real case study that I just decided not to throw the name of the company under the bus, but it's real, and they could have monetized by selling to the doctors, for instance. They chose not to, for the same reason that lots of companies don't, is that they could scale up and grow their revenue much faster by offering it free to doctors and then selling all of the data they were going to get access to. As consumers, we have to ask ourselves, I think, when we get something for free, why is it for free? Because I assure you, it's not, typically. Katie, did that answer your question? Sort of. I'm looking at Katie's question again.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. Yeah, no, I love this, what you just said is, why is it free? And like you said, for us product people, right, we know that's the trade-off, but just think about all of the millions of people out there who really don't perhaps even comprehend that there is a give and a get there of something that might be free.
And that's part of that consent conversation, right? The idea that the average person who is not a product person is consenting to what's actually going on is just not true. They're not. They don't understand. And so, the consent idea is just, it's not sufficient.
Right.
I see a question that says, can services be considered good and ethical?
Good and ethical.
I'm not sure I understand that question, meaning services rather than products. Is that maybe what that person means? I hope so, because I'm in a services company and I lead one. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay. And I do think it can be good and ethical, but I think you have to ask yourself the same questions. So I, am leading a consulting company. What we do is we build digital innovation and products for other people for the most part. So it is purely a services company. And I think we're highly ethical. And I actually take, one of the reasons why this topic's really important to me is because it's a role that I can actually take in other companies, right? We can bring this to them if they're not asking themselves these questions. So I absolutely do think services can be good and ethical, but the intention and the monetization and the transparency all has to be there in the same way that a product has.
Right. And maybe if there's another questions, we do have about 4 minutes here, and then we'll have to drop off. So if there are any other ones, feel free to go ahead and put those into the chat. But Carey, I like this metaphor